For most of your life, you may have been told, directly or indirectly, that something about you needed fixing. Too sensitive to noise, too intense about your interests, too forgetful, too blunt, too easily overwhelmed, too much, or somehow in the same breath, not enough. What almost no one explains is that for millions of people, these traits aren't personality flaws or failures of effort. They're the observable signature of a brain that is wired differently, not defectively, differently from what's often assumed to be the default way of thinking, feeling, and processing the world. This video isn't a diagnostic checklist, and it isn't a claim that everyone who relates to this is automatically neurodivergent. It's an honest look at what neurodivergence actually means psychologically, why it's been misunderstood for so long, and why understanding a brain's real wiring, rather than forcing it to imitate someone else's, changes everything about how a person can function and thrive. The term neurodivergent was coined to describe brains that process information, sensory input, attention, and emotion in ways that differ meaningfully from the statistical majority, most commonly associated with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and related conditions, though the term is used more broadly as well. The key idea behind the concept isn't that these brains are broken versions of a normal brain. It's that human cognition was never one single design in the first place. It's a spectrum of different operating systems, each with its own strengths and its own friction points depending on the environment it's placed in. A brain that struggles in a loud, rigid, one-size-fits-all classroom might function exceptionally well in an environment built around its actual wiring. The disability in many cases isn't purely internal. It's the mismatch between the brain and the environment it's forced to operate in. One of the most misunderstood aspects of neurodivergence, particularly in ADHD, is executive function. The brain's system for planning, prioritizing, starting tasks, and regulating attention. For a neurotypical brain, executive function often operates fairly consistently. For many neurodivergent brains, it's inconsistent by design, capable of intense, sustained focus on something genuinely engaging and almost unable to begin something equally important but understimulating. This is often mistaken by others and by the person themselves for laziness or a lack of discipline. But research on executive function suggests the issue isn't motivation at all. It's a difference in how the brain regulates dopamine and initiates action. Understanding this distinction matters enormously because a person spending years being told to simply try harder at a task their brain is neurologically less equipped to initiate is being set up to fail at something willpower alone was never going to fix. For many neurodivergent people, especially autistic individuals, the sensory world itself is processed differently, not metaphorically but literally. Fluorescent lighting, background noise, clothing textures, or crowded spaces can register as significantly more intense than they do for a neurotypical nervous system, sometimes to the point of genuine physical discomfort or exhaustion. This is why an environment that feels perfectly manageable to one person can feel completely overwhelming to another. Not because of a difference in tolerance or resilience, but because of a genuine difference in how the nervous system filters and processes incoming sensory data. What looks from the outside like an overreaction is very often an accurate, proportional response to a genuinely more intense sensory experience. One of the most exhausting, least visible aspects of neurodivergence is masking, the conscious or unconscious suppression of natural behaviors in order to appear more neurotypical. This can mean forcing eye contact that feels physically uncomfortable, rehearsing normal conversational responses in advance, or suppressing physical self-regulation behaviors like fidgeting or stimming. Masking is often adaptive in the short term. It reduces social friction and judgment. But researchers have increasingly documented its long term cost, sometimes called autistic burnout or masking fatigue, chronic exhaustion, anxiety, and a gradual erosion of self identity that comes from spending enormous daily energy performing a version of normalcy that was never a natural fit. Many neurodivergent adults, especially those diagnosed later in life, describe the diagnosis itself as less of a label and more of an explanation, finally understanding why an entire life had felt quietly, invisibly exhausting. Neurodivergence is frequently framed entirely around deficits, what a person struggles with relative to a neurotypical standard. But the same wiring differences that create friction in poorly fitted environments also produce genuine, well documented cognitive strengths. Many autistic individuals show exceptional pattern recognition, deep domain expertise, and a strong commitment to accuracy and honesty. Many people with ADHD demonstrate remarkable creative problem solving, rapid idea generation, and an ability to hyperfocus intensely on work that genuinely captures their interest. People with dyslexia often show strengths in spatial reasoning and big picture, nonlinear thinking. None of this erases the genuine challenges, but it reframes neurodivergence as a different distribution of cognitive strengths and weaknesses, not simply a deficient version of a neurotypical baseline. The goal for a neurodivergent person was never to force their brain to run someone else's operating system through sheer effort. What genuinely helps, according to research and lived experience, is building an environment and a routine around the brain's actual wiring rather than around an idealized normal that was never designed for it. External structure and reminders instead of relying purely on internal motivation, sensory accommodations instead of forcing tolerance, and permission to work in intense, focused bursts rather than forcing a steady, evenly paced schedule that doesn't match how the brain actually operates. Equally important is simply having language for the experience. Many people spend decades believing they're fundamentally flawed, only to discover, sometimes through a formal diagnosis, and sometimes simply through learning about neurodivergence, that the difficulty was never a personal failure. It was an unaccommodated difference. If anything in this video felt personally familiar, that recognition is worth taking seriously enough to explore further, ideally with a qualified professional who can offer an actual assessment rather than a label from a video. A brain that struggles to function on someone else's settings isn't a broken brain. It's a different one, and understanding the difference rather than fighting it is often the first real step toward actually functioning well instead of quietly exhausting yourself trying to imitate a default that was never yours to begin with. Mastering your mind doesn't mean forcing it into a shape it was never built for. It means finally learning the shape it actually is. If this resonated with you, subscribe, because next week we're breaking down the specific signs of high-functioning burnout that often go unnoticed until it's already too late.